Cadia did not fall in a single moment. It fell in 1,000 quiet tragedies. In the beginning, there was only purple. Not the rich purple of royal velvet or the deep purple of bruised fruit, but the pale, endless purple of a sky that never quite decided whether it was day or night. The skies of Cadia hung perpetually in twilight, painted in shades of lavender and lilac, touched by the distant glow of something terrible and beautiful at once. The Eye of Terror, that great wound in reality, hung above Cadia like a second sun, like a god's watchful gaze, like a reminder that was never allowed to fade. The people born beneath those purple skies knew nothing else. They were born into twilight. They lived in twilight. And when their time came, they died in twilight, their eyes reflecting that same pale violet hue they had seen every day of their lives. This was Cadia, a fortress world, a bulwark against the night. The planet that stood at the very threshold of madness itself, holding the line between the Imperium of Man and the screaming chaos of the warp. For 10,000 years, Cadia stood. For 10,000 years, its people trained and fought and died and trained again. Generation after generation, cycle after cycle, like the turning of a great wheel that could never stop, would never stop because the moment it did, the galaxy would drown. But we are getting ahead of ourselves. Let us go back. Let us go back to the very beginning, when Cadia was young, when its pylons still hummed with purpose, when its first colonists looked up at that wounded sky and made a choice that would echo through millennia. They were not soldiers at first. The initial colonists who came to Cadia during the long-ago days of the Great Crusade were explorers, archaeologists, scientists seeking to understand the strange black structures that dotted the planet's surface. These pylons, as they came to be called, were older than humanity's recorded history, older perhaps than humanity itself. They stood in geometric patterns across Cadia's continents, silent and enigmatic, thrumming with an energy that pushed back against the warp itself. The early Cadians studied them with wonder. They built their first settlements in the shadow of these ancient monuments, not yet understanding that they had chosen to make their homes on the most strategically vital world in the entire galaxy. They farmed the purple-tinged soil. They raised children who played in the shadow of mysteries their parents could not solve. They watched the Eye of Terror bloom in the sky and thought perhaps that they could live here peacefully, that this strange beauty could be theirs without cost. They were wrong, of course. But for a little while, for a brief and precious moment in the long span of history, Cadia knew something like peace. The first city was called Kasr Galan, Kasr, the Cadian word for fortress, though at the time it was more settlement than stronghold. Stone buildings with high windows to catch the perpetual twilight. Markets where traders sold vegetables that grew in strange shades under the alien sun. Children who learned to read by the light of the eye itself, never knowing that other worlds had skies of blue, that other peoples lived without that constant reminder of humanity's ancient failure. In those early days, before the Black Crusades, before the endless wars, the Cadians developed their culture in isolation. They became a hardy people, self-reliant and pragmatic, shaped by the harsh realities of their world, but not yet defined entirely by war. They developed their own dialect, clipped and efficient, wasting no words. They built their kasrs tall and strong, learning from experience that every structure should be defensible, even if the reason wasn't yet clear. And they trained their children. Even then, even in those comparatively peaceful times, Cadian parents understood something fundamental about their world. The Eye watched. Something out there in that roiling madness knew they existed. And so, even before the Imperium's military apparatus descended upon their world in full, the Cadians taught their children to shoot, to march, to stand firm in the face of fear. By the time a Cadian child could walk, they could field strip a lasgun. By the time they could read, they could recite the Manual Militarum. By the time they reached adolescence, they were soldiers in all but name, waiting only for the formal conscription that would make official what had always been inevitable. This was not cruelty. This was love. Every parent who placed a rifle in their child's small hands did so knowing that one day that rifle might be all that stood between their son or daughter and oblivion. Every drill sergeant who shouted at teenage recruits in the training fields did so hoping that muscle memory might save them when conscious thought failed in the heat of battle. Every veteran who told stories of previous crusades did so to prepare the next generation for the horrors they would inevitably face. Cadia was a world of soldiers, yes, but it was also a world of families who ate dinner together when they could, of lovers who stole moments of peace between deployments, of grandparents who sang lullabies to children whose eyes already reflected the purple glow of duty and sacrifice. The planet itself seemed to understand its role. The continents of Cadia, Kasser, Losk, Delvgon, and the others each developed their own character, their own contributions to the defense. The northern wastes bred hardy scouts who could survive in conditions that would kill softer soldiers. The southern Khazars produced the finest sharpshooters in the Imperium, patient and precise. The eastern coastlands trained amphibious assault troops who could storm beaches under fire without breaking formation. Everywhere, in every settlement, the message was the same: the planet broke before the Guard did. But that phrase, that defiant declaration that would one day echo across the galaxy, had not yet been coined. That would come later, much later, after the lessons had been learned in blood and tears and the ashes of burned cities. The first time the sky tore open, no one was truly ready. Oh, they had warning systems. They had sentries posted at the very edge of the Cadian Gate, that navigable corridor of space through which warp travel was still possible near the eye. They had astropaths who screamed warnings of the gathering storm, who spoke in fevered visions of black ships and ancient hate given form. But no warning could truly prepare them for what emerged. The First Black Crusade came like a tsunami of malice, led by Abaddon the Despoiler, once Ezekiel Abaddon, once first captain of the Luna Wolves, now War Master of Chaos and inheritor of a hatred older than most stars. He brought with him the full fury of the traitor legions, the twisted remnants of those who had turned against the Emperor 10,000 years before and had been festering in the eye of terror ever since. Cadia's defenders fought with desperate courage. They held the Kassars. They made the traitors pay for every meter of ground in blood and screaming. But when the crusade finally retreated, driven back by Imperial reinforcements, the Cadians understood something they had only intellectually known before. This would happen again, and again, and again. The Second Black Crusade came and was repelled. The Third crashed against Cadia's defenses and broke apart. The Fourth, the Fifth, the Sixth, each one a new configuration of horror, a new test of Cadian resolve. Centuries passed between some crusades, mere decades between others. Time became measured not in years, but in the spaces between invasions, the breathing room to rebuild, to train the next generation, to shore up defenses and pray they would be enough. Cadia became a world where no one expected to die of old age. The Khazars grew taller, thicker, their walls reinforced with ferocrete and faith. Entire generations were born, lived, and died having never seen a time of true peace. The purple skies became synonymous with vigilance. Children learned to sleep through the sounds of artillery drills. Families developed traditions around deployment schedules. Couples married in brief ceremonies between battles, knowing that their time together might be measured in hours rather than years. And still, they endured. The Seventh Black Crusade nearly broke through. The Eighth scattered into 1,000 smaller raids that took decades to fully suppress. The Ninth introduced horrors that older veterans still refuse to speak about, even now, even after everything. The 10th, the 11th, the 12th, each one carved its lessons into Cadian flesh and bone, teaching the people of the Purple World how to fight, how to survive, how to die well when survival was no longer possible. Between the Crusades, Cadia exported soldiers. Cadian regiments were shipped across the galaxy, carrying with them the cold efficiency and unshakable resolve that came from being forged on humanity's most embattled world. Wherever they went, they earned respect, and sometimes fear, from the enemies of mankind. To face Cadian shock troops was to face soldiers who had been training for war since they could walk, who viewed death as an acceptable outcome as long as the mission succeeded, who would hold a position until ordered to retreat or until the last soldier fell. Cadia stands, they would say before battle, not as a question, not as a hope, as a statement of immutable fact, repeated like a prayer or a promise. And for thousands of years, it was true. But what was life like there beneath the purple skies when the guns fell silent? Imagine a city built entirely of stone and steel, every street positioned to provide clear firing lanes, every building designed to be defensible. The casters rose like mountains from Cadia's surface, self-contained fortress cities that could seal themselves off entirely if necessary. Within their walls lived millions, soldiers, yes, but also bakers and teachers, mechanics and artists, all the ordinary people who made up a functioning society, all trained to fight when the call came. Morning on Cadia began with the dawn horns, though dawn itself was a relative term on a world locked in perpetual twilight. The horns echoed through the Kasr levels, a deep brass sound that vibrated in the chest and signaled the start of another day. Families would rise, perform their morning ablutions, and gather for breakfast if time allowed. The food was simple, practical: protein rations, carbohydrate blocks, vitamin-enriched water. Taste was secondary to nutrition. Everything on Cadia was measured by its utility. Children attended school in the morning hours, learning mathematics and reading and history, but also tactics and weapon maintenance and first aid. A typical lesson might involve calculating artillery trajectories, or reading primary sources about previous Black Crusades, or memorizing the location of major arteries for field triage. Education was comprehensive and entirely practical. By age 10, a Cadian child knew more about combined arms warfare than many career officers in other imperial regiments. Afternoons were for training. The entire population, from ages 6 to 60, was expected to participate in regular military drills. These weren't optional. The training grounds in each Kasr rang with the sounds of marching boots, shouted orders, the crack of lasguns firing at target ranges. Young and old alike stood in formation, broke down and reassembled weapons, ran obstacle courses designed to simulate battlefield conditions. But even in this regimented life, there were moments of humanity. Soldiers on leave would gather in the Kasr's common areas, trading stories and jokes, their laughter echoing off stone walls. Young couples would steal away to the observation towers, where they could look out at the purple landscape and for a little while pretend they were somewhere else. Artists, yes, Cadia had artists, would paint murals on the walls of bunkers depicting scenes of heroism or, sometimes, simply flowers and trees and skies of blue, things that existed only in imagination for most Cadians. Music drifted through the corridors of the Kasrs. Cadian folk songs, usually sung in close harmony, often melancholy in tone. Songs about soldiers far from home, about love found and lost, about the planet that demanded everything and gave back only the cold comfort of purpose. Musicians would play instruments carved from spent shell casings, drums made from ammunition containers, creating beauty from the detritus of war. There were festivals too, rare and precious. Victory celebrations after a successful defense, remembrance days for fallen regiments, religious holidays dedicated to the emperor. During these times, the Kasrs would come alive with something approaching joy. Ration restrictions would be temporarily lifted. People would drink Cadian rotgut, a harsh alcohol distilled from local plants that could strip paint but warmed the belly. They would dance the old dances, steps that had been passed down through generations, movements that told stories of battles and heroes and the eternal vigilance required of Cadia's people. And there was love, despite everything, perhaps especially because of everything. Cadian marriages were simple affairs, conducted by regimental chaplains or Kasr administrators, witnessed by comrades who might also be family. Vows were exchanged quickly, without elaborate ceremony, because elaborate ceremonies required time that couldn't be guaranteed. The words were always the same, variations on ancient themes: to stand together, to support each other, to remember that even in darkness there could be light, even in war there could be love. Children were treasured, perhaps more than on worlds where survival was more certain. Every birth was celebrated by the entire Kasr, not just the immediate family. Every child represented hope, proof that Cadia would endure, that there would be another generation to hold the line. Parents who died in battle could do so with the knowledge that their children would be cared for by the community, raised by the Kasr itself if necessary, taught and trained and loved in the unique Cadian way. The elderly, those rare few who survived to old age despite the constant warfare, were treated with deep respect. They had seen crusades come and go. They remembered the spaces between wars. They carried the living history of Cadia in their memories and would sit with the young, telling stories of famous battles, legendary commanders, heroic sacrifices. These stories were not entertainment. They were education, passing down the lessons learned in blood so that future generations might survive a little longer. Families maintained traditions across deployments. A mother might keep a child's favorite toy in her footlocker, carrying it through campaigns on distant worlds. A father might write letters to his daughter every day, even knowing they wouldn't reach her for months or years. Siblings separated by military assignment would exchange Voxcaster messages when they could, brief transmissions that said little but meant everything. I'm alive, I'm thinking of you. Cadia stands. Religion permeated every aspect of life, though not in the fervent, zealous way of some imperial worlds. Cadian faith was quiet, personal, practical. The Emperor was revered, certainly, but as a distant figure, a concept more than a presence. What mattered more were the small rituals, touching the Kasr gates before deploying, carrying a purity seal taken from a fallen comrade, whispering a prayer before battle, not for victory, but simply for the strength to do one's duty. The Cadian saying went, "The Emperor protects, but a loaded lasgun doesn't hurt either." Then came the year the sky darkened. It began not with invasion, but with silence. The astropaths screamed and died. Warp travel near the Cadian gate became impossible, then dangerous, then suicidal. Ships disappeared. Worlds on the periphery went dark, their last transmissions speaking of shadows and madness and the sound of laughter in the void. Cadia's defenders knew what this meant. The warning signs were familiar, written into the planet's history in scars and ash. Another Black Crusade was coming, the 13th, though no one yet knew it would be different from all the others, that this time Abaddon had learned from his failures, that this time he came not to conquer but to destroy utterly. The muster began. From across the Imperium, forces converged on Cadia. Regiments of the Imperial Guard, thousands upon thousands strong, from worlds that had never seen war and worlds that knew nothing but. Space Marine chapters sent companies, battle brothers in power armor who stood head and shoulders above normal men. The Imperial Navy brought battleships and cruisers, filling the orbital space above Cadia with steel and fury. Titan legions strode through the Khazars, god machines of the Mechanicus, whose footsteps shook the ground. But the bulk of the defenders, as always, were Cadian. The Cadian 8th, the 412th, the famous Cadian 13th, Lucky 13s, regiment after regiment mustered in the great parade grounds, their purple and gray uniforms blending with the twilight sky. Old soldiers stood alongside green recruits. Veterans of multiple crusades checked their equipment next to teenagers who had finished basic training only days before. They looked up at the Eye of Terror and saw it growing, swelling, reaching toward them like a malignant hand. And they prepared to do what Cadians had always done, stand and fight until there was nothing left to stand on and no one left to fight. Abaddon's fleet emerged from the warp in waves, each one larger than the last. Black Legion warships, twisted and baroque, bristling with weaponry and malice. Ships from all the traitor legions, World Eaters, Emperor's Children, Death Guard, Thousand Sons, united in their hatred of the Imperium. Daemon engines and Hellforges, vessels that were more alive than any ship had right to be, screaming their way across the void. The battle for Cadia began in orbit, a vast three-dimensional chess game, played with ships as pieces and lives as currency. The Imperial Navy fought with disciplined ferocity, lance batteries and torpedo salvos lighting the void with brief stars. They died in the cold of space, sometimes quietly when hull breaches exposed crew to vacuum, sometimes spectacularly when reactors overloaded and ships became momentary suns. Below, on the surface, the Cadians watched their sky fill with fire. The first landing craft began their descent, burning through Cadia's atmosphere like falling stars, except these stars carried death. They crashed into prepared kill zones where Imperial artillery had been pre-sighted for exactly this eventuality. Thousands died in the first wave, never making it out of their transports. Thousands more pressed forward over the corpses of their comrades, driven by madness and dark faith and the promises of demon princes who cared nothing for the lives of their followers. The defense of Cadia became a symphony of violence played out across an entire world. Thunder of artillery, crack of last gunfire, roar of tank engines, and the deeper, more terrible roar of titans. The screams of the dying and the war cries of those who would make them die. The smell of promethium and blood and ozone from overheated weapons. And through it all, Cadian discipline held. Officers gave orders that were obeyed without question. Units fell back in good order when their positions became untenable, established new firing lines, held those lines until ordered to retreat again. Soldiers who ran out of ammunition fixed bayonets. Soldiers who lost their weapons picked up the weapons of the fallen. When positions were overrun, the defenders fought with knives and fists and teeth, making the enemy pay for every meter in blood. This was what they had trained for, every day of their lives since they were old enough to hold a weapon. This was the purpose for which Cadia existed. But Abaddon had learned. Over 12 previous crusades, he had learned Cadia's strengths and finally its weaknesses. The pylons had stood for eons, ancient beyond human comprehension, built by a race long vanished to hold back the warp itself. They were Cadia's true defense, more than any fortress or army. As long as the pylons stood, the Eye of Terror could not advance. As long as they hummed with their alien power, reality remained stable. The Imperium kept at bay. Abaddon needed them gone. His forces struck at the pylons with focused determination. Chaos Space Marines teleported directly to pylon sites, bypassing defensive lines. Demonic entities phased through reality to assault the structures directly. Dark Mechanicus tech priests wielded arcane weapons designed specifically to disrupt the pylon's function. One by one, the ancient monuments began to fall, toppled by explosives or corrupted by warp energy, or simply overwhelmed by the sheer weight of assault. Each time a pylon fell, reality on Cadia shifted slightly. The barrier between the material and immaterial weakened. Strange things began happening in the chasers. Soldiers saw figures that weren't there, heard voices speaking in languages that hurt to hear. Shadows moved wrong. Time felt elastic, stretching and compressing in ways that made veterans check their chronometers repeatedly, unsure if minutes or hours had passed. But still, the Cadians fought. Even as their world became stranger, even as the physical laws they had relied on their entire lives began to bend and break, they held their positions and followed their orders and died in ranks so neat that it seemed choreographed. The Cadian 8th held the line at Kasser Gallon for 6 days without relief, fighting off wave after wave of traitor legionnaires. When they finally received orders to fall back, fewer than 100 remained of the original 5,000. They retreated in formation, still maintaining fire discipline, still obeying the doctrines drilled into them since childhood. The Cadian 412th defended a pylon site on the northern continent until the structure fell despite their efforts. As reality warped around them, as daemons poured through tears in space, they fought on until the last soldier was dragged screaming into the warp. Their final transmission was simply, "Cadia stands." The famous Lucky 13s earned their nickname again by surviving what should have been certain death 3 times in a single day, through a combination of tactical brilliance, desperate courage, and sheer random fortune. They held the port city of Kasser Vasan, evacuating civilians even as traitor artillery reduced the city to rubble around them. Their colonel, Marda Hellstrom, personally shot down an enemy landing craft with a Lascanon while standing on top of a burning chimera, refusing to take cover until the evacuation was complete. Stories like this emerged from every Kasser, every battlefield, every desperate last stand. Cadia was being torn apart, but it was not going quietly. In orbit, Lord Admiral Quarren led the Imperial fleet in a fighting retreat, attempting to maintain orbital superiority even as more and more traitor ships emerged from the warp. His flagship, the Iron Revenant, took hit after hit but kept fighting, its void shields flickering and failing and reigniting through the sheer bloody-minded determination of its engineering crew. Space Marines from a dozen chapters fought alongside the Guard, their superhuman abilities buying time and space for the defenders to regroup. The Black Templars held the Cathedral of St. Medellin against a siege that lasted 72 hours. 3 battle brothers and 100 guardsmen against thousands of cultists and traitor Marines. When the cathedral finally fell, not a single defender was taken alive. Their bodies were found in a perfect circle around the altar, facing outward, weapons empty, having fired their last shots at point-blank range. But strategy was against the defenders. Abaddon was not trying to conquer Cadia. He was trying to break it. Every pylon destroyed weakened the planet's defenses, not just militarily but metaphysically. The warp pressed closer. Reality stretched thin like worn fabric, and things from beyond reality began to seep through. Amidst the thunder of war, there were quiet moments, small and precious and heartbreaking. A father in the Cadian Eighth wrote a last letter to his daughter, knowing he wouldn't survive the night's assault. He wrote by the light of burning buildings, his hands shaking from exhaustion and fear, but his words were steady. You are braver than you know, stronger than you think. Remember what I taught you. Remember that Cadia stands as long as Cadians stand. I love you. I am so proud of you. He placed the letter in a sealed container with his regimental identification, hoping it would somehow reach her. It wouldn't. 3 hours later, his position was overrun, but he had written it anyway, because that's what fathers do. 2 soldiers in a bunker, old friends from the same hab block, shared their last low stick as enemy forces advanced. They didn't speak much, didn't need to. They had known each other for 30 years, had survived 5 campaigns together, had watched each other's backs through more battles than they could count. One made a joke about finally getting a break from his wife's cooking. The other laughed, a brief sound quickly swallowed by the noise of battle. Then the wall exploded inward, and they died together, as they had lived, side by side, and laughing despite everything. A medic in a field hospital worked for 60 straight hours, treating wounded faster than they arrived, her hands steady even when her mind screamed for rest. She sang while she worked, old Cadian lullabies her grandmother had taught her, songs about purple skies and safety and home. The wounded found comfort in her voice, even those who knew they wouldn't survive their injuries. When the hospital was hit by artillery fire and she was killed instantly, dozens who she had treated mourned her as they continued fighting, carrying her memory like a talisman. A commissar stood before his firing squad, ready to execute a soldier who had broken and run during a Daemon assault. The regulations were clear. Cowardice in the face of the enemy was punishable by death. But as he looked at the young man, really just a boy, no more than 16, he saw terror and shame and the understanding that he had failed not just the Imperium but himself. The commissar holstered his bolt pistol. He gave the boy a las gun. You get one more chance, he said quietly. Make it count. The boy returned to the line and died there an hour later, fighting, redeeming himself in the only way left available. The commissar never reported the incident. Lovers met in ruins for stolen minutes, holding each other amid the rubble of their world. They spoke of futures they knew they wouldn't have, made promises they couldn't keep, and found brief comfort in warmth and touch, and the reminder that they were still human, still capable of gentleness, even as everything gentle was being stripped away. Some of these moments resulted in children who would never know their fathers, who would be born in the holds of evacuation ships, who would carry Cadia with them, even though they never saw their homeworld whole. A grandmother gathered the children in her hab block, the ones whose parents were on the front lines, and told them stories while artillery shook the walls. She told them about Cadia in the old days, before the 13th Crusade, when training drills were the worst they had to worry about. She told them about heroes and victories and the promise that good people, brave people, could stand against the darkness. The children listened, eyes wide in the flickering emergency lights. When a shell hit their block and collapsed the ceiling, she threw herself over them, her body shielding 3 children who survived when she did not. Across the planet, in 1,000 cassers and bunkers and trenches, similar scenes played out. Humanity persisting in the face of annihilation. Love and courage and sacrifice. Small acts that would never be recorded in histories, that no one would remember, that mattered absolutely and profoundly to the people experiencing them. This was Cadia too. Not just the soldiers in the battles, but these moments, these connections, these small defiances against the void. The end, when it came, arrived from the sky. The Will of Eternity, Abaddon's flagship, a vessel the size of a small moon, ancient and malevolent and powerful beyond comprehension. It had been hidden in the warp, waiting while the battle raged below. Now Abaddon brought it forth, not to join the fleet battle, but for a single terrible purpose. He turned it into a weapon. The will of eternity began its death dive, engines screaming, its mass accelerating toward Cadia's surface. Lord Admiral Quarren understood immediately what was happening and ordered every available ship to stop it. The Imperial Navy threw everything they had at the descending fortress ship. Lance strikes that could vaporize smaller vessels barely scorched its hull. Torpedo spreads disappeared into its void shields. Fighter squadrons strafed its surface and were swatted aside like insects. It could not be stopped. On the surface, Cadians looked up and saw their death approaching. A mountain of metal and hate falling from the sky, blotting out the purple twilight. Orders to evacuate were impossible to obey. There was nowhere to evacuate to, no time to reach safety, even if safety existed. So they did what Cadians do. They kept fighting, kept holding their positions, kept executing their orders until the very end. Some prayed, some cursed, some stood silent, weapons ready, determined to face death as they had faced life, with discipline and courage and the cold comfort of duty done. The impact occurred at 1437 hours, local Cadian time, in the LSR region of the Western continent. The will of eternity struck Cadia like the fist of an angry god. The immediate destruction was total. Everything within 1,000 kilometers ceased to exist in any meaningful way, atomized by the kinetic energy of a moon-sized object striking a planet at terminal velocity. The shockwave raced outward at supersonic speeds, a wall of pressure and heat that leveled cassers and overturned tanks and killed millions in seconds. But the physical destruction was only the beginning. The impact destabilized Cadia's tectonic structure. Fault lines that had been stable for eons suddenly shifted. Volcanoes dormant since before human settlement erupted simultaneously across 3 continents. The planet's crust fractured, magma forcing its way through cracks that opened like wounds in the world's surface. And with the last pylons destroyed, with reality itself compromised by the impact, the warp rushed in. The sky over Cadia tore open. The Eye of Terror, no longer held back, expanded to embrace the world it had been denied for 10,000 years. Demonic entities poured through the gaps in reality, no longer needing ships or summoning rituals, simply existing wherever the barrier between dimensions had worn too thin. Cadia began to die, but it died slowly, in pieces, giving its people time to understand what was happening, to make their choices, to face the end with whatever courage they could muster. In Kasser Tirok, Lord Castellan Ursarkar Creed organized the defense even as the city crumbled around him. He coordinated fighting withdrawals, established evacuation priorities, ensured that every soldier who could still fight had ammunition and orders. When the situation became untenable, when it was clear that the city could not be held, he refused evacuation himself. He remained at his post, calling in artillery strikes, directing units to defensive positions, buying time with his own life for others to escape. His last transmission to the fleet was characteristically brief. It has been an honor. Across the planet, similar last stands occurred. Regiments formed defensive circles in the rubble of fallen Khazars, fighting back to back as reality dissolved around them. Civilians huddled in the deepest bunkers, singing the old songs, holding their children close, trying to maintain some semblance of normalcy, even as the world ended. Tank crews, their vehicles immobilized by the shifting ground, turned their weapons into fixed gun emplacements and fought until their ammunition ran dry, and then kept fighting with sidearms and knives. The evacuation fleet did what it could. Ships descended through the chaos, landing in cratered fields and ruined spaceports, taking on as many people as they could hold, and then more, packed into cargo holds and corridors and anywhere there was space. Captains made impossible choices about who to take and who to leave behind. Some ships were overrun before they could lift off, their crews and passengers massacred on the landing fields. Others escaped, burned their engines to maximum thrust, and prayed to the Emperor that they would reach orbit before Cadia's death throes caught them. The planet's rotation slowed, the impact having affected its spin. Days and nights, already strange under Cadia's purple skies, became even more distorted. Time itself seemed to fracture, pockets of accelerated and decelerated temporal flow appearing randomly. Soldiers experienced subjective hours in objective minutes. Children aged years in moments. The dying lingered in pain that should have ended quickly, but stretched into subjective eternities. Continents began to break apart. Fault lines became canyons. Canyons became chasms. The Western continent, where the will of eternity had impacted, simply ceased to exist as a coherent landmass, fragmenting into thousands of pieces that either sank into the mantle or were thrown into space by volcanic eruptions of unprecedented scale. Khazar-Partox, one of the oldest fortress cities, slid into a newly opened rift in the planet's crust, taking 30,000 souls with it. Their last transmission was a defiant roar. Cadia stands. Even as they fell into magma and darkness and death, they maintained their faith that Cadia, the idea if not the physical world, would endure. The northern wastes, always harsh, became utterly lethal as the climate system collapsed. Superstorms spawned from the temperature differential between the planet's heating core, and the cold void of space rushed across the landscape at hundreds of kilometers per hour. Entire armies, loyalist and traitor alike, were scoured from the surface by winds carrying debris like shrapnel. And still, impossibly, some fought on. On a hill that no longer had a name, in a region where geography had ceased to have meaning, a company of the Cadian Eighth held their position against wave after wave of cultists and daemons. They had no support. No reinforcement was coming. No escape was possible. They fought because it was what Cadians did, because stopping meant admitting defeat, because as long as one of them still breathed and held a weapon, Cadia had not fallen completely. They fought until the ground beneath them liquefied, until they fell, screaming defiance, into the molten core of their dying world. In orbit, Lord Admiral Quarren made the decision he had hoped never to make. The evacuation fleet, already straining beyond capacity, could not take everyone, would not take everyone. There were millions still on the surface, fighting and dying and begging for extraction, and there were not enough ships, not enough time, not enough anything. He ordered the fleet to make the jump to warp space while they still could, while the Cadian Gate remained navigable, before the planet's death convulsions made escape impossible. The ships began their departure sequence. Engines flared bright against the dying world below. One by one, they translated into the warp, carrying with them fragments of Cadia, its people, its culture, its unbreakable will. Those left behind watched the ships depart. Some cursed, some wept. Most simply returned to their positions and continued fighting, because what else was there to do? They had been born on Cadia. They had lived as Cadians, and if they could not leave, then they would die as Cadians, with a weapon in hand and defiance in their hearts. A Vox operator in a collapsed bunker sent one final message to the departing fleet, her voice calm despite the sounds of battle around her. Tell them we did not break. Tell them Cadia stood to the last. Then static and silence, and she was gone. In the deep shelters beneath Khazar-Myrak, where civilians had taken refuge, a schoolteacher gathered the children around her. The walls shook, the lights flickered. She could hear the fighting drawing closer, could smell the smoke and the strange, sickly sweet odor that accompanied warp intrusions. She knew there would be no rescue, no last-minute salvation. So she did what teachers do. She taught. She told the children about the Imperium, about the millions of worlds where humanity thrived, about the Emperor who watched over them all. She told them that Cadia was not just a planet, but an idea, a promise that courage mattered, that sacrifice meant something, that standing firm in the face of evil was its own reward. She told them that even though they would not survive, the galaxy would remember them. "You are Cadians," she said softly, as the door began to buckle under assault. "Nothing can take that from you, not even death." The end came not in fire, but in silence. The planet's core, destabilized beyond recovery, finally gave way. Cadia did not explode in some dramatic fashion. Instead, it simply came apart like a puzzle disassembling itself, pieces drifting away from each other in the vast silence of space. Continents became islands, islands became mountains, mountains became boulders, and boulders became dust, all of it floating in the void where a world had once been, illuminated by the baleful light of the Eye of Terror that now claimed this space as its own. From orbit, for those few ships that remained, unable or unwilling to leave, it was beautiful in a terrible way. The fragments of Cadia tumbled slowly through space, each piece catching the light differently, creating patterns that shifted and changed like some vast, tragic kaleidoscope. Cities that had stood for 10,000 years drifted past in perfect silence, their buildings intact but lifeless, frozen monuments to what had been. Bodies floated among the debris, soldiers in their uniforms, weapons still clutched in dead hands, civilians in their simple clothes, faces frozen in expressions that ran the gamut from terror to peace to grim determination, children who would never grow up, elderly who had survived so much only to fall at the last, all of them tumbling through vacuum, preserved perfectly by the cold, a silent testament to the price of defiance. The pylons, what remained of them, drifted too. Those ancient structures that had held back the warp for eons, now just rubble floating in the dark. Scientists would later study the fragments, try to understand the technology, attempt to replicate it, but the secret was lost if it had ever been knowable at all. The pylons' creators were long gone, and they had taken their knowledge with them into whatever oblivion awaited ancient races. The Eye of Terror expanded to fill the space where Cadia had been. The Cadian Gate, that navigable corridor through which Imperial ships had traveled for millennia, ceased to exist. The stable warp routes that had made this region accessible collapsed. The Eye now stretched further into Imperial space than ever before, a wound in reality that had finally consumed the world that had opposed it most fiercely. Abaddon stood on the bridge of a surviving ship, looking at what he had wrought, and perhaps, for the first time in 10,000 years of hatred and war, felt something like satisfaction. He had succeeded where 12 previous crusades had failed. He had broken Cadia. The planet that had defied him again and again was gone. But even in this moment of triumph, he could not help but acknowledge a truth that gnawed at him. Cadia had not surrendered, had not capitulated, had not begged for mercy or offered terms. It had fought until there was nothing left to fight with and nowhere left to fight from. And its people, those who had escaped, carried with them something he could not destroy with all his ships and all his warriors and all his dark god's power. They carried Cadia with them. The evacuation fleet emerged from the warp, scattered across a dozen systems, each ship carrying its cargo of survivors to different destinations. Some went to fortress worlds where Cadian military expertise would be valued. Others settled on agri-worlds, trading their weapons for plows, though they never quite forgot how to fight. Still others joined new regiments, spreading Cadian doctrine and discipline throughout the Imperial Guard. Everywhere they went, they brought Cadia with them. The survivors did not speak much of the fall at first. The wound was too fresh, the loss too profound. They wore their purple uniforms or their civilian clothes, and people could tell where they were from by the look in their eyes. A certain hardness, a readiness, a quality that marked them as people who had seen the worst and endured it. Children born on the evacuation ships, who never set foot on Cadia soil, were still Cadian. Their parents taught them the old ways, the discipline, the values. They learned to field strip weapons in the crowded holds of transport vessels. They memorized the names of cassers that no longer existed. They absorbed their parents' memories like osmosis, taking on the weight of a destroyed world they would never see. The phrase spread, Cadia stands, not Cadia stood, not Cadia fell. Present tense, defiant, unbreakable. Because in the minds of those who had escaped, in the hearts of those who carried Cadia with them, the planet had not fallen, could not fall. As long as Cadians existed, as long as they upheld the values and the discipline and the courage that had defined their world, Cadia stood. It became a rallying cry across the Imperium. Soldiers from other worlds took it up, inspired by the Cadians' refusal to acknowledge defeat. Cadia stands, they would say before charging into battle, before holding impossible positions, before making last stands of their own on worlds whose names would also one day be added to the long list of places sacrificed to humanity's survival. The survivors formed new regiments, designating them with old numbers to maintain continuity. The Cadian Eighth reformed around its survivors, absorbing recruits from other worlds, but maintaining its character, its traditions, its standards. The Lucky 13s, reduced to fewer than 100 members, rebuilt themselves, training new soldiers in the Cadian way, ensuring that the regiment's luck would continue. Veterans would gather in quiet places, bars on distant worlds, chapels on newly settled planets, the holds of warships between battles, and remember. They would speak the names of fallen comrades, recite the old litanies, sing the mournful songs of their dead world. These were not despairing gatherings, but affirmations of identity, reminders that they were Cadians, that Cadia was more than rock and soil, that what mattered was the will to stand and fight regardless of the cost. Lord Castellan Creed, presumed dead in Khazar Tirok's final moments, was declared a saint by some, though the ecclesiarchy never made it official. His tactical doctrines became required study in Imperial Guard officer schools. His final transmission, "It has been an honor," was inscribed on monuments across the Imperium. Whether he had actually died or somehow escaped became the subject of legend and debate, but what mattered was what he represented. Cadian leadership in its purest form, duty unto death and beyond. Children who had been evacuated grew into soldiers, carrying with them their parents' stories and their own fragmented memories of purple skies. They fought on 100 worlds, and wherever they fought with Cadian discipline and Cadian courage, proving again and again that their world's destruction had not diminished them. The Cadian diaspora became one of the great migrations of imperial history. Entire fleets of refugees, homeless but not defeated, scattered across the galaxy seeking new homes, but never forgetting the old one. They established communities on worlds that had never heard of Cadia, teaching their new neighbors about the planet that had stood against the Eye of Terror for 10 millennia. And slowly, over years and decades, a new understanding emerged. Cadia had not lost. Yes, the planet was gone. Yes, millions had died. Yes, the Cadian Gate had fallen and the Eye of Terror had expanded. These were facts, undeniable and terrible. But Abaddon's goal had been to break Cadian resolve, to prove that defiance was futile, to demonstrate that even the strongest fortress would eventually crumble. In this, he had failed. Because Cadia's strength had never been its fortresses or its weapons or even its strategic position. Cadia's strength had been its people, and they were unbroken. They stood on new worlds under different skies, and they stood as Cadians. They trained their children as Cadians. They fought as Cadians. They died as Cadians whenever death came for them, with the same cold courage that had defined their ancestors. The planet broke before the Guard did. That phrase, coined in the aftermath of the fall, spread like wildfire through Imperial forces. It was painted on tanks and carved into armor. It was spoken as a prayer and shouted as a battle cry. It became the defining statement of Cadian identity, the proof that spirit could survive the destruction of matter, that will could outlast stone. In the cold reaches of space where Cadia once orbited, debris still drifts. Chunks of ferrocrete and rockcrete, pieces of buildings that once housed families and soldiers. Fragments of vehicles, weapons, personal effects, all the detritus of a destroyed civilization, floating in eternal silence. Scavengers sometimes venture there, hoping to find relics or salvage. They report strange things, equipment that still functions despite being exposed to vacuum for decades. Data slates with intact records of battles and daily life. Sometimes they claim you can hear voices on old Vox frequencies, though this is dismissed as interference or imagination. The Imperium has declared the space where Cadia existed a memorial zone, though enforcing this is difficult, given its proximity to the Eye of Terror. Ships passing through, those few that still dare to travel this region, often pause to honor the fallen, their crews standing in silence while the captain offers a brief prayer. Some of these ships carry survivors, Cadians returning to the site of their world's death. They come to remember, to pay respects, to ensure that Cadia's strength had been its people, and they were unbroken. They stood on new worlds under different skies, and they stood as Cadians. They trained their children as Cadians. They fought as Cadians. They died as Cadians whenever death came for them, with the same cold courage that had defined their ancestors. The planet broke before the Guard did. That phrase, coined in the aftermath of the fall, spread like wildfire through Imperial forces. It was painted on tanks and carved into armor. It was spoken as a prayer and shouted as a battle cry. It became the defining statement of Cadian identity, the proof that spirit could survive the destruction of matter, that will could outlast stone. In the cold reaches of space where Cadia once orbited, debris still drifts. chunks of ferrocrete and rockcrete, pieces of buildings that once housed families and soldiers, fragments of vehicles, weapons, personal effects, all the detritus of a destroyed civilization, floating in eternal silence. Scavengers sometimes venture there, hoping to find relics or salvage. They report strange things, equipment that still functions despite being exposed to vacuum for decades, data slates with intact records of battles and daily life. Sometimes they claim you can hear voices on old Vox frequencies, though this is dismissed as interference or imagination. The Imperium has declared the space where Cadia existed a memorial zone, though enforcing this is difficult, given its proximity to the Eye of Terror. Ships passing through, those few that still dare to travel this region, often pause to honor the fallen, their crews standing in silence while the captain offers a brief prayer. Some of these ships carry survivors, Cadians returning to the site of their world's death. They come to remember, to pay respects, to ensure that Cadia is not forgotten. They bring with them items to release into the void, personal effects of those who died, letters written but never sent, small tokens of remembrance. These objects join the debris field, adding to the vast, scattered monument of Cadia's existence. There are stories, unconfirmed, possibly apocryphal, of survivors who refuse to leave, who live in makeshift habitats on the larger fragments, maintaining a presence in the place their world once existed. The Imperium denies these stories officially, but occasionally ships report seeing lights on the debris, brief flashes of habitation that disappear upon closer inspection. Perhaps these are merely legends, stories told by Cadians to comfort themselves with the thought that still watches over their dead world. Or perhaps, in the grim darkness of the far future, there really are those who refuse to abandon Cadia even in death, maintaining their vigil among the ruins. The Eye of Terror looms over it all, that vast wound in reality now expanded beyond what it was, claiming the space that Cadia fought so long to deny it. Sometimes, on instruments calibrated to detect such things, traces of the old pylon network can still be detected, faint echoes of the energy that once held back the warp, like the ghost of a heartbeat in a body long dead. Scientists study these readings, hoping to understand, to perhaps recreate what was lost. So far, they have failed. The technology of Cadia's ancient benefactors remains beyond human comprehension, a mystery that died with the world it protected. The Imperium has tried to establish new fortress worlds to replace Cadia's strategic position, but none have succeeded in truly filling the void left by its destruction. The Cadian Gate is gone, and with it the most stable route for Imperial forces to monitor and respond to threats emerging from the Eye. The galaxy is darker, more dangerous, more uncertain than it was, but in that darkness lights still shine. Every world where Cadians settled, every regiment that carries the Cadian designation, every child taught to field strip a weapon before they can read, raised in the Cadian way even under skies that are not purple. Every soldier who looks at impossible odds and chooses to stand anyway, inspired by the example of a world that fought to its last breath. These are Cadia's legacy, not the pylons or the fortresses or the strategic position, but the unbreakable will that the planet's culture instilled in its people. The understanding that some things are worth dying for, that defiance has value beyond victory, that courage matters even when, especially when, the outcome is already determined. In the scholums of 1,000 worlds, children learn about Cadia, not just the military history, not just the tactical importance, but the culture, the people, the ordinary lives lived in extraordinary circumstances. They learn about families who ate dinner together between deployments, about lovers who stole moments of peace amid endless war, about grandmothers who told stories while artillery shook the walls. They learn that Cadia was not just a fortress, it was a home. Sometimes in the quiet moments between battles, Cadian survivors dream of purple skies. They dream of walking through the Khazars, the familiar weight of a lasgun on their shoulder, the sound of their boots on stone floors worn smooth by generations of feet. They dream of the training grounds where they learned to shoot, the common areas where they shared meals with comrades, the observation towers where they watched the Eye of Terror hang in the sky like a malevolent moon. They dream of childhood, of playing in the shadow of pylons they didn't understand, of learning to march in formation before they learned to write their names, of the pride in their parents' eyes when they demonstrated proper weapon handling for the first time. Every world where Cadians settled, every regiment that carries the Cadian designation, every child taught to field strip a weapon before they can read, raised in the Cadian way even under skies that are not purple. Every soldier who looks at impossible odds and chooses to stand anyway, inspired by the example of a world that fought to its last breath. These are Cadia's legacy. Not the pylons or the fortresses or the strategic position, but the unbreakable will that the planet's culture instilled in its people. The understanding that some things are worth dying for, that defiance has value beyond victory, that courage matters even when, especially when, the outcome is already determined. In the Scholums of 1,000 Worlds, children learn about Cadia, not just the military history, not just the tactical importance, but the culture, the people, the ordinary lives lived in extraordinary circumstances. They learn about families who ate dinner together between deployments, about lovers who stole moments of peace amid endless war, about grandmothers who told stories while artillery shook the walls. They learn that Cadia was not just a fortress, it was a home. Sometimes in the quiet moments between battles, Cadian survivors dream of purple skies. They dream of walking through the Khazars, the familiar weight of a lasgun on their shoulder, the sound of their boots on stone floors worn smooth by generations of feet. They dream of the training grounds where they learned to shoot, the common areas where they shared meals with comrades, the observation towers where they watched the Eye of Terror hang in the sky like a malevolent moon. They dream of childhood, of playing in the shadow of pylons they didn't understand, of learning to march in formation before they learned to write their names, of the pride in their parents' eyes when they demonstrated proper weapon handling for the first time. They dream of people, faces they will never see again, voices they will never hear, friends who died in the fall, family members who didn't make it to the evacuation ships, lovers left behind, children lost in the chaos, elders who chose to remain behind so that younger people might have a chance to escape. They dream of the moment of impact, though most were not present to see it. They dream of the will of eternity falling like a dark star, dream of continents breaking apart, dream of cities sliding into chasms and castles toppling like children's blocks. They dream of the end, again and again, unable to escape it even in sleep. But they also dream of Cadia whole, of castles standing tall and proud, of purple skies unmarred by falling debris, of a world at peace, though peace was something Cadia never truly knew. These dreams are bittersweet. They provide comfort and pain in equal measure. To dream of Cadia is to remember what was lost. But to remember what was lost is to affirm that it existed, that it mattered, that it was real and important and worthy of remembrance. The old veterans, those who survived the fall and continued serving, sometimes speak of a peculiar phenomenon. After particularly fierce battles, after days of fighting when exhaustion pushes consciousness to its limits, they report seeing Cadia, not as it was in its final moments, broken and dying, but as it existed in their youth, whole, functioning, eternal. They see the Cassars standing. They see the purple skies. They see comrades long dead walking past them, nodding in acknowledgement. They see training grounds filled with recruits, market squares bustling with activity, hab blocks where families live and love and carry on despite the constant threat of war. Medical officers attribute this to fatigue-induced hallucinations, trauma responses, the mind seeking comfort in impossible memories. But those who experience it know differently. They know that what they see is real in some way that transcends physical reality. They are seeing Cadia as it exists now, not in space, but in the collective consciousness of its people. Cadia as an idea, Cadia as a promise, Cadia as a standard to which all Cadians still hold themselves, no matter where in the galaxy they might be. There is a song that Cadians sing, usually late at night, usually after drinking, when defenses are down and hearts are open. The melody is ancient, older than the Imperium itself, though the words have changed over millennia. It is sung in close harmony, voices interweaving in a way that is distinctly Cadian, taught from childhood, passed down through generations. The words speak of a world that stands against darkness, of people who choose courage over comfort, of sacrifice that has meaning even when it goes unwitnessed, of love that persists despite impossible circumstances, of hope that endures even when logic says it should die. The final verse, added only after the fall, is sung quietly, reverently. Though stone may break and worlds may fall, though cities burn and heroes die, the spirit lives beyond it all, beneath the purple twilight sky. We carry home within our hearts, we hold the line wherever we stand, and though our world was torn apart, still Cadia guards and Cadia stands. When Cadians sing this verse, they often weep, not from weakness or despair, but from the acknowledgement of profound loss and the affirmation of enduring strength. They weep for what they have lost and for what they have kept. They weep because they are human, and humans weep, and there is no shame in tears shed for a world that deserved better than the death it received. Non-Cadians who hear this song, who watch Cadian survivors sing it with tears streaming down their faces, often find themselves moved in ways they don't fully understand. The song carries weight beyond its words, emotion beyond its melody. It speaks to something fundamental about the human condition, the ability to lose everything and still find reasons to continue, to face defeat and still refuse to be defeated. The song spreads beyond Cadian communities. Other regiments learn it, adopt it, sing it before their own battles. It becomes a hymn of resistance, a prayer for courage, a reminder that will alone can achieve what weapons sometimes cannot. Years after the fall, decades even, you can find groups of soldiers on distant worlds, gathered around fires or in transit barracks or in the quiet moments before deployment, singing the song of Cadia. Some of them have never met a Cadian, have only heard stories of the world that stood against the Eye of Terror for 10,000 years. But they understand what the song means. They understand what Cadia represented. And in singing it, they honor not just a dead world, but the principle that world embodied, that defiance matters, that courage has value, that standing firm against overwhelming darkness is worth doing, even when the outcome is already written. The generation born after the fall, children who never saw purple skies or walked through cassers or trained on Cadia's native soil, are perhaps the most remarkable testament to their world's enduring legacy. They are raised by survivors who carry trauma and pride in equal measure. The cycle continues. Educational institutions throughout the Imperium have begun teaching Cadian history, not as a footnote, but as a core subject. The fall of Cadia is studied alongside other pivotal moments in human history. Students learn about the Pylon Network, the Black Crusades, the Final Stand. But they also learn about daily life on Cadia, about the culture that developed on a world in constant siege, about the ordinary heroism of people who lived knowing they might die at any moment. The goal is not just historical education, but the propagation of Cadian values throughout imperial culture. The Administratum and the Militarum recognize that Cadia produced some of the finest soldiers humanity has ever fielded, and they seek to understand and replicate the cultural factors that made this possible. Entire new regiments are formed in the Cadian style, adopting their doctrine, their training methods, their standards. These regiments wear uniforms similar to Cadian purple-gray. They maintain Cadian discipline. They strive to uphold Cadian traditions, even though none of their members are actually from Cadia. Survivors watch this proliferation with mixed feelings. Pride that their world's legacy is being honored. Discomfort at seeing others adopt Cadian identity without having earned it through birth on that particular world under those particular skies. Understanding that this is how cultures survive, by spreading, adapting, being adopted by others. A veteran of the fall, watching a new regiment of Cadian-style troops drill on some distant world, remarked, "They're not Cadians, but they could be Cadian enough." And maybe that's all we can ask for. Maybe that's how Cadia truly stands, not as a place, but as a standard, something to aspire to, something bigger than any single world or people. On worlds throughout the Imperium, monuments have been erected to honor Cadia. Simple obelisks bearing the names of lost regiments. Grand cathedrals with stained glass windows depicting Cadian defenders standing against demonic hordes. Memorial walls where survivors have carved the names of fallen comrades, parents, children, friends. The largest and most elaborate of these monuments exists on Agrippina, a forge world near where Cadia once stood. It is a vast structure of stone and steel, designed to echo the architecture of Cadian castles. Within its walls are preserved relics salvaged from the debris field, pieces of weapons, fragments of uniforms, data slates containing the last messages of doomed soldiers. The monument also houses the Hall of Names, a chamber where every Cadian confirmed to have died in the fall is recorded. The names scroll endlessly on illuminated panels, millions upon millions, taking weeks to cycle through completely. Visitors can search for specific names, and when a name is found, the system displays whatever information exists about that person. Their regiment, their role, sometimes a photograph or brief biography. People come from across the sector to visit this monument. Some are Cadian survivors seeking the names of lost loved ones. Others are curious citizens wanting to understand the world they've heard so much about. Still others are soldiers, come to pay respects and draw inspiration before deploying to their own battles. The monument is never empty. At any hour, day or night, you will find someone standing before the Hall of Names, watching the endless scroll, mourning privately or simply bearing witness. The sound in the hall is hushed, reverent, punctuated occasionally by quiet weeping or the murmur of prayers. Outside, in the monument's gardens, grow flowers genetically engineered to bloom in shades of purple, echoing Cadia's distinctive skies. Survivors often bring soil from their new homeworlds to add to the garden beds, mixing the earth of 100 planets with Cadian dust salvaged from the debris, creating something new from fragments of what was lost. Children play in these gardens while their parents or grandparents visit the Hall of Names. They run between purple flowers, climb on decorative rocks, live their lives in the shadow of a tragedy they're too young to fully understand. In time, they will comprehend. In time, they will bring their own children here, tell them about Cadia, ensure that the memory endures, because that is what humans do. We remember, we honor, we carry forward the stories of those who came before, ensuring that their sacrifices are not forgotten, that their lives meant something, that the price they paid purchased something of value, even if only the inspiration of future generations. At sunset on Agrippina, at least at what counts as sunset on a world shrouded in industrial haze, the monument's bells ring, not a mournful sound but a clear, defiant peal that echoes across the forgescape. It is the same pattern that once rang from Cadian castles to mark the change of watch, the passing of day to night, the eternal cycle of vigilance. Those who hear it, if they know its significance, pause in whatever they're doing. Workers stop their labor. Soldiers come to attention. Civilians bow their heads. For 60 seconds, while the bells ring, the Forge world remembers Cadia. Then the bells fall silent. Life resumes. The work continues. But for those 60 seconds every day, Cadia stands again in the minds and hearts of those who remember. In the end, Cadia's story is not about destruction. It is about what survives destruction. The planet is gone, yes. The physical world, with its purple skies and ancient pylons and fortress castles, exists now only in memory and in the debris slowly dissipating through space. The strategic position is lost. The Cadian gate collapsed. The eye of terror expanded beyond what it was. But Cadia, the idea, the culture, the unbreakable will that defined a people, endures. It endures in every survivor who teaches their children Cadian discipline, in every soldier who stands firm when logic says to retreat, inspired by the example of defenders who held impossible positions because holding was their duty, in every person across the galaxy who looks at overwhelming darkness and chooses to light a candle rather than curse the void. It endures in the monuments and the songs and the stories passed down through generations, in the regiments that maintain Cadian designations and standards centuries after the fall, in the pilgrims who visit the debris field to honor the dead and affirm their connection to a world they may never have seen. It endures in the simple phrase, spoken like a prayer or a promise or a defiant roar against the night. Cadia stands. Not stood, not fell, stands. Present tense, eternal. Because as long as there are people who embody Cadian values, courage, discipline, sacrifice, the will to stand against evil regardless of cost, then Cadia has not truly fallen. It has transformed, dispersed, become something larger than any single planet could ever be. A survivor old now, her body bearing the scars of the final crusade, sits with her great-grandchildren under alien stars. They have never known Cadia, these children. They were born on worlds with blue skies or red skies or no skies at all. But they know the stories, taught carefully and lovingly by parents and grandparents who refuse to let the memory die. "Tell us about Cadia," they ask, as children always do, wanting to hear familiar stories repeated one more time. And she tells them about purple skies and fortress casters, about training from childhood to defend against threats they couldn't yet understand, about families who ate dinner together when they could, lovers who stole moments of peace, children who played in the shadow of ancient mysteries, about the day the sky tore open and the world ended, but the people did not. Did Cadia really stand? The youngest asks, confused by the present tense everyone uses for a world that no longer exists. The old veteran smiles, touches the child's cheek with a scarred hand. "Cadia stands," she says softly. "It stands in you, in me, in everyone who remembers, and everyone who learns, and everyone who chooses to be brave when bravery is needed. The planet broke, little one, but we did not." The child seems to understand, in the way children do, intuitively grasping truths that adults struggle to articulate. "Cadia stands," they repeat, testing the words, making them their own. "Always," the veteran confirms. "Always." Cadia did not simply fall, it became eternal. In the cold reaches of space, debris continues its slow tumble through the void. Fragments of a world that stood for 10,000 years against the greatest threat humanity had ever faced. Pieces of lives lived and lost, dreams dreamed and shattered, courage demonstrated in a million small ways that history would never record. The eye of terror looms over it all, victorious in a sense, having consumed the world that most opposed its expansion. But if the entities within that vast wound in reality expected the defenders to break, to despair, to abandon their purpose in the face of ultimate defeat, they were disappointed. Cadia fell, but Cadians did not. They scattered across the galaxy, carrying with them the purple-tinged memories of home, the discipline instilled since childhood, the absolute certainty that some things are worth defending even unto death. They joined new regiments, settled new worlds, raised new families, and everywhere they went, they brought Cadia with them. The planet is gone. The physical place no longer exists. But the spirit, the culture, the unbreakable determination that made Cadia what it was, these things endure, indestructible, eternal. Late at night, on 1,000 different worlds, Cadian survivors look up at whatever stars shine in their local skies and remember purple twilight. They remember the friends they lost, the world they loved, the duty they performed until duty itself became impossible. And they smile, sometimes through tears, because they know a truth that their enemies will never understand. Cadia did not fall in a single moment. It fell in 1,000 quiet tragedies, each one a story of courage and sacrifice and love demonstrated in the face of annihilation. And in falling it rose. It became more than a world. It became an example, an inspiration, a promise that courage matters even when victory is impossible. The Guard stands where Cadia stood. Every trench held, every position defended, every impossible stand made by Imperial forces across the galaxy. These are Cadia's legacy. The planet broke, yes, but the principle survived. And so, in the grim darkness of the far future, beneath skies of every color except the purple they remember, Cadians continue their vigil. They train their children, they hold their lines. They face each new threat with the cold efficiency and unshakable resolve that comes from being born to a world that knew nothing but war and chose to face it with dignity and courage. Cadia stands, not as a place on any map, not as coordinates in space, but as something more fundamental and enduring, as proof that spirit can outlast stone, that will can survive the destruction of worlds, that humanity's greatest strength has never been its weapons or its fortresses, but the simple, profound courage of ordinary people who choose to stand when they could flee, to fight when they could surrender, to hope when they could despair. The story of Cadia's fall is tragic, yes, but it is not a tragedy without meaning. It is the story of how a world died defending what it loved, how a people faced annihilation without breaking, how courage demonstrated in the final moments can echo forward through centuries, inspiring those who come after. Sleep now and dream of purple skies. Dream of fortress casters standing tall against the night. Dream of soldiers who became more than soldiers, families who were more than families, a world that was more than a world. Dream of Cadia, and know that somewhere in the galaxy, on worlds you've never seen, under stars you've never named, children are learning to stand firm in the face of fear, to hold the line regardless of cost, to embody the values that made Cadia eternal. The planet broke before the Guard did, and the Guard stands still forever.